Hello, good morning. This is our oral presentation, and we're going to talk about the movie and the story of a revolution. This is Elio Romero, Fausto Jimenez, and Valeria Ro. We're going to talk about the nature of revolutions and progress in society. Now, the philosophical question here is, are revolutions guided by free will, or are they deterministic consequences of their context?
Now, I'm going to introduce the definition of revolution that we're going to use for this presentation, which is a revolution is a fundamental change in the way of thinking about or visualizing something, a change of paradigm that comes from the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
So let's just establish the status quo. When it comes to the bees are said to have never known any sort of rest for 27 million years. And they have never stopped working, and they've always been taught to laugh instead of cry about their situation. They are also forced to choose a single job, which they are not allowed to change throughout their whole lives, and they're expected to work this job until they die. And also, the value of a bee surges from their productivity. So what they produce in order to produce honey is what actually gives the bees their value. And finally, they are prohibited from interacting with humans given the danger that they represent to them. And also they are forbidden biologically from rebelling through stinging, given that if they sting a human, they die. So these are two mechanisms that avoid bees from like rebelling against the system. Now, when it comes to humans, we're going to talk about especially the Kens, And in this case, Ken is an example of what we would call the bourgeoisie, which is the owners of the means of production, who is the ones that reap the benefits of the honey that is produced by the bees. And they don't want the bees to improve their life quality, because it is because of this exploitation that they get to reap the benefits of the honey. So what they do is they control the market, they reap the benefits, and in order to make this system prevail, they embellish the means of production. So for example, they use figures such as a teddy bear and make it cute. And even though that bears are a very, very dangerous animal, both to bees and to humans. Also, they do have this idea that human lives are worth a lot more than bee lives. And it is through this system of whitewashing or embellishing the means of exploitation that they get the populace to be ignorant about the actual treatment of the bees, and to make even their peers be unknowingly cooperating with this system of exploitation.
Now, our thesis is that Bee Movie demonstrates the deterministic nature of revolutions, which derive from the relationship between a system and a group which perceives its flaws and decides to act upon them.
So the first thing that we have to take in mind is, where does the power of the bees come from? And what we want to present here is the power of the masses and the importance of collective and coordinated action in revolutions. So as I stated earlier, when you look at the impact that a single bee can have on the hive, on the system, by interacting either with other bees or with humans, they are just simply deemed as replaceable shells, meant to be used, discarded, and then replaced as soon as they die by a newly graduated bee. So what this means is that a single bee suffering or being mistreated is basically irrelevant to the system. So what happens is, if we look at this from a utilitarian perspective, the more bees that are being exploited, then the better it would be for them to be set free, because this would offset the amount of suffering that would be caused on humans, given that they would be forbidden from using honey anymore. However, the bees would be given some sort of happiness by being released from this system of exploitation. And another thing is that bees are accustomed to think of themselves only as a means of producing honey. So what they ultimately do is, when they rebel, it's not even because they want to themselves, but rather because they've been conditioned to only produce honey. So it is from this preconception that they become united against this like common enemy, which strikes against their only values and their only purpose in life. Even Barry says in the trial, he says, this is unfair because humans are taking away everything we have and everything we are. So there's a very important delineation between what they define themselves to be and what they want for themselves. And so it is from this that unity allows them to then produce this collective action in the form of suing humanity, not as a single bee, rather as a group of bees that are suffering and are therefore, and that the system would therefore benefit from ending this suffering.
Hi, I'm going to present the second argument. In the movie, bees were able to not only fight for their rights as workers against their exploitation, but the bees are now owners of their work, of the honey, and are no longer working for humans. It is not longer their duty to please the desires of the human populations for honey production. And for this reason, the bees considered this revolution, this uprising, as a success. However, the uprising also brought negative effects. And the moment bees stopped working, pollination stopped, and the environment was affected, which shows up when the plants start dying, specifically the flowers, right? Which are pretty fundamental in the movie. And at this moment, they start questioning whether the regime change was correct. Their freedom, they believe, has cost the lives of plants and made humans unhappy too, such as Vanessa. Bees then face a new question. Was life before the change that miserable? The moment they're free from this exploitative, all-time consuming job, they notice that there's nothing they can actually do with their lives, at least not that they are aware of it. And it is then that they decide that the past system, regardless of the exploitation it brought, existed because it was functional. And because of it, it must come back. This could show then that it was a change of a system that brought the failure. However, the movie doesn't actually show this. Instead, it shows that the revolution in itself reached its goal. Because bees stopped working for humans in this terrible system, they gained the rights of honey. So the revolution could be considered a success. But the movie shows that the historically systemic conditions set around bees caused it to be a failure. And we could say that all revolutions have their positive and negative effects. And the bees couldn't predict the pollination problem the uprising would bring. Not even the magnitude, which was pretty great. However, what made them fail wasn't the pollination problem itself, but it was their inability to critically think of solutions for it. For their whole life, bees were situated in repetitive jobs where no real education or critical thinking was necessary. Barry in the movie mentions that they only have 3 days of grade school, 3 days of high school, and the rest of those days are just to work. Here, hence, I'm showing you this quote that says, "I think, therefore I am." This is because bees could have thought of solutions for their new regime. It was what could have helped the revolution. Instead, they decided to come back to this past system that was tiring and exploitative, but it was easier than trying to create change. We could say then that failure was already determined by the conditions bees lived in. The lack of education wasn't a strategy created to force them into an exploitative human system, so they wouldn't be able to move forward into creating a fairer system for themselves. Hence, we could ask, what could bees actually aspire to if they knew nothing about real freedom? Exploitation was all they knew after all.
We could argue that in reality, revolutions are an example of how individuals portray their views on how the world should work, acquired under their mere free will. There is no need for an external trigger, but ideas that want to be put to practice. Barry was the factor that let the revolution happen. Without him, nothing of this revolution would have taken place. That is why systemic oppression does not necessarily mean an upcoming revolution from oppressed groups. Instead, individuals with revolutionary ideas can really transform their environment through cooperation with people who share their same ideals. An important thing to note is that Barry's colony has no queen. This feeds the argument in the sense that they are not controlled by any superior entity, but their own will, both as individuals and as a collective. Rather than blindly following what a superior entity tells them to do, which would in this case be the queen, which was the case of the concentration camps, where bees migrated because of their queen, and they had really no option than follow their queen. Now, as a conclusion, we have brought and argued about the debates of the century, but this time implemented in the case of revolutions, which brings the question, is our collective need of change a product of free will or our need to shape the world according to our visions, or is it just a mere consequence of the underlying oppression of an unfair system? An undeniable fact is that for a revolution to succeed and not fail due to the conditions it rises from, it is necessary to have both the conditions for it to rise and a mature group that will take action, which is willing to keep the momentum to actually achieve something. These are our references.
And well, that's it. Thank you, Aranza, for your attention, and we hope you really liked it. So yeah, that's it.
Nice. Goodbye.